With me today as my guest is Jane Beddall, and she is here to talk to us about a very important issue, conflict resolution in life and in work. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Can you kindly tell the viewing audience a little bit about your background and what brought you into this work?
Sure. I went to law school long ago when I was young, and I graduated in 1984. At the same time, I received a master's degree in public policy analysis, but a concentration in conflict resolution. And within a couple of years, I had taken my first mediation course. And sometimes people say to me, you must really hate conflict if you're a mediator. And I say, no, actually, I am fascinated by the dynamics behind it, and I get a lot of satisfaction in helping people deal with it.
Excellent. All right. Conflict, is it normal?
Absolutely. People will sometimes say to me, there must be something wrong. There's something wrong with my family because we're fighting over how to care for mom and dad. Something wrong with us because we are disagreeing about what to do with that one absolutely fabulous cookie jar that we can't all share. It's very hard, but it is normal. It's part of life, and the trick is to have it exist without damaging us.
That's a good point. Does conflict actually have to even be negative? Because there should be almost like a spectrum of conflict where it could be addressed respectfully and resolved to the satisfaction of both parties.
Absolutely. It is so much about the process. If we never had conflict, I think we'd all be robots. We would all just not have emotions, and we'd all think exactly the same way about every single thing that came down the pike. But there are conflicts that are positive, and certainly things would not be very creative if we all saw everything the same way. That's how we come up with innovations, we come up with good ideas, we brainstorm and say, well, okay, but I don't think you have it exactly right, and then we go on from there. But the negative ones are the ones that do us damage. But certainly it's not inevitable. As you're saying, there's an entire spectrum of ways to deal with things. And of course, there's a whole spectrum of how important an issue is to us.
Right.
Sometimes it is best to let it go. It just doesn't matter enough. Other times it matters a great deal, especially in matters involving our families. Our emotions are there, and if we just let everything go, it would be very sad in a way. It would indicate that it just doesn't matter to us what's happening with my very own family, and no one would like to live a life like that, I don't think.
It brings me to a point, from a health standpoint, very often people that don't speak their mind stuff it all down. And then they get into things like overeating just to kind of take away the pain of not being heard and their needs being validated. Mm-hmm. What are some of the effects of negative conflict? Well, actually, if you could even talk about some negative conflict, give some examples of negative conflict first.
Sure. And sometimes it is things like, so one family that I worked with, and it was not a terribly complicated estate planning issue, but somewhat, and Dad had told 4 children all along that everything is split equally among you under my will. And that was absolutely true. And everyone expected that, and everyone knew that. And then for reasons that escape me, for some reason Dad had named as the person who would be handling the will, the executrix, by far the ditziest of the 4. Now, maybe in some way that made sense to him, but that did not help matters at all, because it was just not her nature to do anything on time or do anything efficiently. But what really caused tremendous damage to these 4 siblings was that Dad had been accurate about the will. However, there were some very sizable funds that passed by contract, meaning outside the will. It could have been, in that case, it was not life insurance, but it could have been. It was actually an IRA account. Lots and lots of money in that left to 2 kids. And the problem became the 2 who were left out could not believe that Dad had done this on purpose. Or if he had, those evil good-for-nothing siblings of ours must have made Dad do it. On the other hand, the 2 who actually were making out much better had no idea either. No one benefited from this, and it was very, very difficult. When they came to me, they had already been through a lawsuit. They lived in 3 different states, none in Connecticut. Dad lived in a 4th state. They had not spoken for a year, and they had already started to miss family milestones, big parties for their children. So it was very, very sad for them, and hopefully not irreparable, but it was a very difficult time. That was a more obvious one. What we sometimes see are in the negative effects, not speaking to each other, tremendous health issues, as I'm sure you see, the sort of things where people find some way, their body's not dealing with it effectively, but it's trying.
Right.
Sometimes in other settings, occasionally I do work with businesses. It's very hard on the business because everyone is focused on things other than running the business. They're too busy hating each other. Sometimes misunderstandings, once they start, they just keep going. If I didn't get the phone call I thought my sister should have made to me about mom's care, I assume the worst because we're already fighting, and then we just keep on going.
Oh, it sounds so sad. Would you say that there are ways to even try to prevent conflicts from happening? It would seem, open communication would seem to me to be the biggest preventer of conflict, but
it's wonderful. It's wonderful when it happens. Sometimes it's just common sense, but once we are down the path, it's hard. So it's great if you can prevent it in the first place. But one thing that I find very helpful is just plain old realism. I can't really do everything, and neither can my sister. If we are finding ourselves in a family in a situation where mom truly needs more care than she's getting, how are we going to do that? Well, my sister lives closest, so she'll do everything. That's probably not a realistic answer because just like you, your sister has a job, a husband, 2 kids, community involvement. There aren't enough hours in the day.
That's right.
So that one thing that can help is to just think this through. Is this actually going to work? And then maybe things do work for a while. Maybe one child has said, I really can do everything. I'm at a point in my life right now where I can take this on, and it's so important to me that I will actually do everything. And that'll work for a period of time. But it's hard to know how long that's going to work.
And being a caregiver is probably one of the most extraordinary jobs that anyone can ever take. It drains the living life out of that person, especially when whether there's responsibilities or no other responsibilities. Some people require 24-hour-a-day care. And I mean, the book comes to mind, Physician, Heal Thyself. Well, caregiver needs to heal themselves also and take good care of themselves so that they don't tend to develop health problems secondary to this.
And I'm sure you see that, and I see too, finding myself saying, you are not actually helping by running yourself to a state of exhaustion.
Yes.
Because then you're too sick to help.
Right.
And that doesn't help anyone.
Exactly.
So sometimes it will work for a while. The other thing that will happen is things evolve. They always do. It's a question of, this was the level of care required right now. Well, okay, maybe it's a period of months, maybe it's a period of years. It simply is more care that's required. So revising, monitor what you've decided on and then revise it as you go. That can help prevent some conflict with this sort of, well, how dare you not pitch in my sibling? My sibling has no idea because I haven't asked. I haven't said, by the way, it's becoming much more difficult. Or financial issues. And this can go both ways. This can be mom who says, I'm fine. And she wants to be fine. And she shouldn't be ashamed she's not fine financially. But it's so very hard to say. And actually the kids would like to know earlier rather than later. And they'd like to help. It's not that they necessarily have the right words to say, please let us help. Sometimes those very words themselves are tried and they're not enough because mom doesn't want to burden them, doesn't want to worry them. But again, it can help dealing with it earlier. It might prevent a conflict down the road if you can speak, as you say, open communication.
Right.
Just try to talk about what's possible, what are we trying to do, and what's possible is very important. Certainly I meet women my age who are faced with this situation where they have promised mom, never, ever, ever will you need to live in any kind of nursing home or anything like that. And mom wants to hear that, but there may be a point where that's not possible.
Right.
It's not safe for mom. It's destroying the daughter physically, financially, emotionally. That's not what mom wants either. No one wants that kind of pain. So it's nice to not put yourself into a box if you can possibly avoid it. And then once you take a realistic view of things, try not to wrap yourself up in the guilt.
Right.
So hard.
Yes, it is hard. It is difficult. And speaking of guilt, which is an emotion, emotions can really rise up or flare up during a very difficult time or conflict. What should you do with them?
I will hear people all the time say, ignore your emotions. And I think that is just hopelessly unrealistic.
Right.
We're not like that, especially if we truly care.
Right.
And that caring may manifest itself in different emotions, none that you like necessarily. There can be great devotion, but there also can be fear. There can be tremendous sadness. There can be grief
loss.
Even before.
Yes.
A loss for anticipated loss can cause grief. A grief for what we used to have and we don't have, and will we ever get it back? So what I advise people to do is acknowledge the emotions and what they're doing to me, and also the other person with whom you might be in conflict. Your mother's not having any fun saying, no, I really can't find my way home. It's extremely hard for her to say that. She doesn't want to say that. So pushing her can be difficult too. And I will say to people, certainly women my age, who sometimes have fierce views about how to make all this happen, and they've got all the balls in the air, and they will want to say something to mom, like, we're taking away the keys. And I will say, just pause for a moment and picture your daughter, who's right now 20, saying that to you in 60 years. Well, about that point, you can just see their hair curl, and they say, okay, that's a little different perspective. I would be mortified for my daughter to speak to me like that. So there are ways to try to deal with what you're trying to accomplish, which is usually getting around safely. That's the real goal, what we're trying to do.
And Jane, I have to give you credit because it seems like you deal with so many sensitive, very, very, very sensitive situations. So I give you credit for that. Are there ways to reduce the intensity of conflicts that do happen?
I think that you really can. And again, there's some real common sense, but very hard to apply sometimes. The first thing is to actually decide we have to do something. People will say to me sometimes in my business, who are your competitors? And I will say, and I don't mean this to be smart alecky, but I will say, denial is a very big competitor. Oh, it's not a problem that I haven't spoken to my brother in 6 weeks because I'm so angry at him. That's fine. No, of course that's not fine. Another type of denial would be, and the particular family that I worked with was absolutely, they were very intelligent people, very well educated people. Dad at that point was 90. He lived in one state, and not the same family, but similar situation where they lived in 4 other states. Dad lived alone. He was extremely independent. He thought it made sense to go on the roof and do roof repairs alone. No one even knew he was up there. But what that brought them to me was that they jointly owned a modest vacation home that needed a lot of repairs. And Dad had said, it's time for you folks to start to handle this because I just can't anymore. So we were working on that, and we were pretty good on that. And so Dad was not physically present, but he was very much a part of the mediation that we were having in New Haven. And I said to the 4, so what's the plan for the possibility that Dad falls off the roof? Utter silence. Plan for that? Well, that's not going to happen. He did have that blood pressure issue last year, but that's better now. And one of them was a physician. And the idea that Dad would never have failing health, already being 90, made it very difficult for them to avoid conflicts coming. So denial was a little bit, so we started to work towards, okay, you were having a hard time communicating about the vacation property. You're also having a hard time communicating about what's going to happen when Dad needs some care, and it's not really if. And someday, something's going to happen. So that can be, denial's tough. Deliberate delay is another thing. Oh, it will get better when. This problem will take care of itself. Almost never. I mean, it's nice to think about.